Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me here. When my daughter was in middle school, she came home one day and I could hear her talking to my wife in the kitchen. My wife was trying to prepare dinner, and she said she wanted her to help her with some of her science homework. And my wife was busy, but my wife could have, because she actually taught science and math in the public school. And she said, "Oh, I'm really busy now. Your father is a scientist. Get him to help you." And she looked, I could hear her voice was really crestfallen, and she said, "Mama, I don't need to know that much about it." So I think all of us have been in that situation. But anyhow, hopefully you won't feel that way at the end of this period. Also, Mark said there's some of my class coming in, so I'm going to have to kind of rush through that. I can see the clock back there. That's good, because I was going to put a watch up here. You've seen, there's a preacher back in Georgia, used to always hear him talk. He'd take his watch off and make a big production of putting it on the pulpit. And then he wouldn't look at it for 2 hours. So I'm not going to do that. Anyhow, it was a very interesting thing that Mark and I were talking, and he heard me give this seminar. I actually gave it at the Molecular Breeding Conference out in Utah back in 2012. They had asked me to give a plenary talk on what's happened in forage breeding through that 40 years, and so that's hence the title, Breeding, from Breeding to Molecular Breeding, and that's really what's happened. So I'd like to get into this talk just to say that there was probably another reason Mark chose me to do this. He could have chosen a lot of people, but I also looked at it very closely. And I'm as a scientist, I really started plotting my own career and looking at my peers, and it kind of goes in this continuum, from and you can tell when you get in that mid-career, that's where you gain 15, 20 pounds. You're just eating and traveling. And so if you want to know why I'm really giving this talk, it's because that's all I'm capable of doing at this stage, is talking. I'm going to set the tone for this talk. The theme of this talk is something that I actually read a long time ago, and I think it's important. I think it's important in life. And this guy, of course, many of you knew Samuel Johnson. I read his stuff. He was a very British essayist. And anyhow, he said people need to be reminded much more than they need to be instructed. And if you think about it, if that's wrong, then your mothers are wrong, or your wife's wrong. How many times have you been told to clean your room, brush your teeth? I mean, once they instructed you, they didn't. It was just then 20 years of reminding you to do it, wasn't it? So it's a very effective teaching tool. And what I'm going to do today is just, over that 40 years, is just to remind you of some things that have happened or could happen, and maybe some things you should keep in mind. And also, I'll have to apologize. I'm going to come at it from a perspective of a plant breeder who was a cultivar developer. I'm not the best geneticist, and I'm sure not a genomicist, and I have to work with people who are, but that's really was my career. So I'm going to come at it from that standpoint too. I just want to say right off the bat, for those of all us out in mission country, not in the academy here, you ought to be proud you're at this university. This has a great history. And those of us out there knew about it. When I was going through my education, well, of course, there were some corn geneticists who taught us, so we read not only McClintock's papers, but we read Marcus Rhodes' papers too. My cytogenetics textbook was written by Bouton. And of course, I heard George Beadle actually came to the University of Georgia and gave a talk there, but I didn't know Beadle quite as well. And of course, so Emerson must have been something. Now, everybody said, well, he had those great students and anybody could have done it. Well, I'm not sure. Because you still got to attract the best students, and you've got to train them. And you've got to motivate them in some ways. So I'm not sure what Emerson had, so I can't pass that on. But whatever it was, he must have had plenty of it, because he really attracted some students. So just know that, first of all, you're part of a big legacy for us in plant breeding, and you should be proud of yourself for being at this university. There was a man, actually Glen Burton was a mentor of mine. When I was at Florida, I worked with pearl millet for my PhD degree, and Burton had a big pearl millet project up at Tifton, Georgia, which was right across the Georgia line, wasn't about 2 hours from Gainesville, where the University of Florida was. And Burton was a man of his generation, and he was, so he was at a little small, he came from Rutgers, actually went from Nebraska to Rutgers, and then after he got his PhD, he went and settled in Tifton, Georgia. He tells a story, this is back in the 30s, and he can't even find Tifton. He goes to Macon and starts asking people where it is, and they send him on down the line, and so he finally gets there. It's just a little small town. But he published over 700 refereed journal papers. He was a member of the National Academy, and his varieties are still today, and he died in 2005, as you can see. His varieties today are still planted over millions of acres in the forage with coastal Bermuda, and he discovered cytoplasmic male sterility as an operating system in pearl millet, et cetera, et cetera. So anyhow, Burton wrote this in 1966, and so as I look back, I was starting to take my plant breeding classes about 68, 69, and this was probably the thinking at that time, and he wrote it, and I'm just emphasizing a few things, and he was talking about the primitive plant breeders, you know, and kind of contrasting his generation with that. And of course, it was full of things like, you know, they had to work hard and you know, had to work with their hands, and they had more limited germplasm. But the main thing he talked about at the end there, he said they had more time, actually. They were on the cutting edge. You know, if they didn't do right, they starved to death. But on the cutting edge, we have to be more efficient. So efficiency was the watchword for the breeders of that generation. How were we going to be more efficient? And to them, efficiencies were in two things, but they were mainly in technology. How are we going to move into technology to make ourselves more efficient? And the efficiencies also, there was a school of thought that if you had the best mating designs, and you know, there was a school of thought in mating designs and trying to solve epistasis, and that was fine, but the real roll up your sleeves plant breeding, it was all about technology. And I'll just show you in my generation, I'm sure some of y'all still do some hand labor like this, but you know, big time programs, I mean, you know, they're operating out there, instead of doing 100 plots, they do 1,000, load up and go to another place and do another 1,000. So the efficiency of moving in both, in this case, planting, as well as harvesting, a lot of hand labor, jerry mowers, you know, cutting and carrying, you know, stuff, as opposed to machines now that do everything, even take a moisture sample, everything's there, they just load them into the computer after they get through. So, but this was a big move. I can tell you, it's like when you talk about people hand milking versus, they'll tell you we went to that technology quickly. My grandfather talks about the biggest day of his life was when he got to get rid of the mules and got a farm all tractor. That was a big day. So that first move is obvious. You know, we moved in a lot into the technology, and it expanded our abilities as field breeders, especially, to do a lot of plots. Your numbers, you've heard it many times, numbers go up, so we wanted more numbers. To get more numbers, you have to be able to do things faster, quicker, and more rapidly. The big one, though, as you know, lately has been in computation and communication. So that I've got on the left there, it's early in my career, even as a faculty member, we were doing batch jobs, and first time I ever did an analysis of variance was on an old Monroe spindle type calculator. Anybody ever done a hand sums of squares by hand? Yeah, there's some. Yeah, Julie, I'm sure you did. But Well, I did. So I know. But now it's, you know, this is just in my retirement office. I mean, I got an iPad and an iPhone, and I've got a laptop that I can dock, and I got as much power in that laptop as we had in those big batch programs, more. So that's been a big move. So just a reminder, again, remember this whole talk's going to be reminding you of things and reminders of the technology moving forward. Now, this has been the one that really, as you get into molecular breeding, I've kind of defined it myself there as a. So to me, and as a field breeder, it was being able to use these genomic and transgenic technologies, biotechnologies, in conjunction with my traditional breeding program. How was I going to apply these things that were evolving very quickly into the breeding program? And that was probably what we've tried to concentrate on the most. But they were in these first two areas, and I'll just briefly talk about them a little bit. But there was a driver even back then for why did we move here? I mean, we were solving the equipment problems, we were solving the computation and communication problems with technology. What was going on here? Why did the breeders, even somebody like me, want to say, we got to do a better job? You know, I can give more plots, but I still have this problem. And this is Plant Breeding 101, day one. And it goes back to that. I wanted to manipulate G. I always wanted to manipulate the genes, but I didn't. It was always the environments were screwing me up, you know, or I had to put them in enough environments to be able to explain G. And I could break G down. I mean, with the mating designs, I could get the additive portion or the dominance portion or the epistatic portion. That really wasn't my deal. I really wasn't a quantitative geneticist, but I knew I wanted to manipulate G. I just didn't know how. But these technologies promised me a real way to do it. And so that's why I bought in. You know, I mean, I bought in and say, we got to do this, because if not, I'm not going to make a lot of progress. I'm not going to make as much progress. I've hit the wall now with all my equipment. I can do more plots, but I can make progress, but can I make the ultimate progress? Well, these offered a lot of promise. And there were a lot of promises early on, too, and that was one of the problems. One thing I want to leave you with here, too, is for you to think about is, that's just part of this thing. When you're out in the real world, too, you got to remember, what is your reference population of genotypes you're working with, and what is your reference population of environments you're working with? Because too many breeders try to extrapolate too far. At the end of the day, when you do a heritability study or whatever, you're only working with those environments and those genotypes. A classic thing for students is me, especially, I want to extrapolate to the whole tall fescue world, all across the world. I'm just going to take these 10 genotypes and 2 environments. I got 2 reps for environments and no degrees of freedom for reps. I got all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, you got to keep that in mind, I think. But the main thing here is that we wanted to manipulate G in a lot more efficient thing. And also, there were a lot of breeders too, a lot better than me, who were singing the praises. You know, or saw it as a future. I mean, and you know, when breeders like Norman Borlaug was talking about it, you better listen, you know, because if not, these people like this see things. So I don't know if you noticed Burton's life expectancy there too. He was 95 years old, and so another thing about being a plant breeder, you might live to be an old man or an old woman, you know, because they were all in their 90s when they finally passed away, went to glory. So what happened during that time was, I'm sure it was faster in the grain crops than here, but I thought I'd just use our main international conference in forage and pasture crops, which was the International Grassland Congress. Happens every 4 years. And they just had it last week, in fact, in Australia. 4 years before, it was in China, then in Dublin, Ireland, and it just moves around. So if I look at the papers, I went back and looked through all the proceedings and got a rough estimate of the papers, and I put, what was happening is they were putting in the plenary papers then to, you know, try to motivate people. And so Vasil wrote a paper, if you know some of these guys, Peacock, Spangenberg is still active. So they would come in and give the plenary talks, but as far as the number of papers, it just was a big lag phase for a while before the forage breeding community was actually putting out posters and papers at these international meetings, but then it really started taking off around 2000. To now, in China, there was over 50% of the talks or the papers presented had a biotech approach built into the breeding papers, not just the genomics papers. I'm talking about if you went to the standard breeding talks, they were trying to make application of it. So the future looks good, but it was a lag. You know, in my own, even looking at my own work, this was the first paper I ever published. It was my master's degree, and I was working with a grass called centipede grass. And look at what, I mean, all I did was we learned how to count chromosomes and how to do a karyotype and how to do an inheritance study. The only thing that was kind of cutting edge at that time, there was a guy there who did some isozymes, and we were looking at clones, so we could use isozymes to separate clones. I got my hands, but it was a mess. We were using gels, and I don't even want to go there. But then contrast that with a paper that we wrote recently. We didn't write it. I didn't write. You can see where I am in the pecking order there. I'm just one of the people. But we did make the crosses and followed some of these traits. But so you can see the big changes from what would you consider not a cutting edge, but a fairly traditional breeding study done in '72 versus one done in 2010 or 2009, whenever this one came out. So we have all the key index words have changed. I mean, we didn't even know what, some of these key index words, so that's been a big change even in my own career. But the other thing too is that I really didn't do it all like I did before. What I did was work with people who could do this. And of course, this student, and of course, Maria Monteros, if you know her, she's at her lab, and Wayne Parrott. I mean, so it was just following mutants and then being able to use molecular markers to mark them. So again, getting to my main thing here is cultivar development. So to me, I want to look at the application, but just to bring you up to speed a little bit of what my thinking was all during this time, and especially today. To me, breeding is very distinct steps. It's a continuum of steps. You keep feeding things in, and it just keeps coming through. But you get your germplasm, however you create it, steal it, hybridize it. I don't care how you get it, but you get it. And then you do your actual selection and breeding, and what you learn in your plant breeding classes, whether it's recurrent selection, blah, blah, blah. And then you get into the testing. And this is where the separation starts happening. This is where the resources start getting up and up and up, higher, higher, higher. And then if you're lucky, you can actually get a release or commercialization of that. You mentioned alpha grays. I'm going to go ahead and tip my hand right here, say that our latest variety is a Roundup Ready variety. But just know that, as a breeder and as somebody who wanted to develop a cultivar, the projections were that it could go like soybean, alfalfa. I don't think quite as bad as soybean, Don, not 90% market share. But if it starts getting 60%, 70% market share, you're either going to play in a 30% market or you're going to play in a 60% market. So if your varieties are going to go in, they're going to have to go in with traits, maybe. So we got both going on. We've developed commercial, conventional varieties as well as transgenic varieties. But I can only tell you, too, that was an experience. Breaking that down a little bit more, this was put up for switchgrass, but anyhow, I was trying to just figure out where does these technologies fit in, and they fit in different places. This is my view of the world, and I'm sure we can argue some of these things, but they do fit, and they fit very well, and they're very powerful. They're very powerful tools to get traits into cultivars and keep them in there. But they also, as you can see, when you start getting into the testing phase, you might have to do some things that you really didn't have to do traditionally. You have to get permitted trials if you go into deregulation. And then finally, to get into release, you might have to overcome patents so there's a lot going on here that it depends on what you do with them. I can tell you that from a cultivar developer standpoint, that's always been a valley of death. It's just the valley can become very deep if you got to go into permitting and deregulation. But it always, to get across that valley, you've got to come out and do a lot of stuff, as you can see, with testing and doing even management plans. For us in forages, we got to feed animals with it. I mean, the last thing we want to do is put a variety out there and then some farmer calls and said all his cows got their feet in the air, because we got a toxin in there or whatever it was. So to go into the release and commercialization is, I'll just say that I've always called it the valley of death, and you can, and technologies can make that valley even deeper if you're not careful. So when will these biotechnologies impact forage farmers? Now, I'm only speaking from the forage and maybe some bioenergy crop standpoint. And then I'm quoting the old New York Giants football coach, Bill Parcells, because I think this is where the marketplace is. The potential is nothing. Performance is everything. If you don't perform, you're not going to make it. It's the same with cultivars. I'm proud of this picture, though. This farmer is in Arkansas, and both of these things are ours. That's the Jessup Max-Q tall fescue that he mentioned, and the other is Durana white clover. So they were real proud of it. They took a family picture with willing to let. So I'm proud that they got good use out of it. Okay, what are the problems then? What are the problems we've had to overcome? The first one, of course, is cost. From those of us from the past to now, and especially when I became a director and had budgetary responsibility for these programs, the only thing I knew was it was going to cost more. They said, "What did you learn?" I said, "Well, it's going to cost me more." I can tell you that flat out. Especially if you look at the old seed, feed, and fertilizer model from the early days to running a genomics program. So the costs are high. The payoff is high, but the costs are high. So it's a risk-reward kind of thing, and it's another reason some of the lower value crops just hadn't gotten into it. So costs are high. For us in forages, the targets were diverse. We had many crop targets. As even Mark said that, well, we developed a lot of cultivars, and we had several species, but most of them were in about 2 or 3 species that had a big market. So we're talking about alfalfa, we're talking about tall fescue, we're talking about white clover, even a global market. So it's, but outside of that, there's a lot of species and a lot of cultivars in this area, and so where are your targets? Can you afford them? And that was the problem. So I just put this out there. This was written by Chris Pollock and Mervyn Humphreys and that group at Iger, and of course they're hoping, and one of the things they keep telling y'all, if you can make these things more generic across species, you'll help a lot of people out. So always think about generic use too, like medicine, generic pharmaceuticals. But we did make some progress. The first one was they did come out with Roundup Ready. It was messy, but they came out with a transgenic. And so now that you're in the door, alfalfa has a potential to have other traits. But even there has a problem. Again, cost. Patents, you still got to have freedom to operate. And the regulatory, terrible issue. I mean, it's terrible from the standpoint if you're having to do it. It's probably good for the society that you do it, but it's a tough go. And then I put in red, what traits will bear these costs? I've heard numbers of $100 million to bring a trait from scratch all the way through and end through the market. I mean, that's everything. $100 million. Well, you've got to be able to charge a lot for that seed to recover even your investment cost. So, and then you still got it, you might not even get it deregulated. You might spend a lot of money before you can get it deregulated. So, and so in the forage area especially, is anyone asking farmers what they're willing to pay? You start talking about tacking on a $3 a pound a license fee or, trait fee like they're doing now with Roundup Ready. Well, they've been willing to pay it a little bit in alfalfa for that, but will they be willing to pay? I don't know. So transgenics, even in a major crop like alfalfa, has limitations, even though there is now a pathway to get those traits in. Well, I cut off a little bit there, but it was a public perception problem, led to regulatory problems. I love this picture because I can always, anytime I can stick my thumb in a lawyer's eye, I really love it. But even though I've got relatives who are lawyers, but it caused all kinds of problems for deregulation, and some are good, and some are needed, and some are just over the top. And so if you get into this area of transgenics, just know that it's not for the faint at heart. And the other thing that I learned is, I hate to say this too, but if it wasn't for Monsanto, we never would have got it through. They hold your hand. You ever seen a teacher walk with preschool kids across the street? They're all holding hands. That's basically, if you're in the regulatory thing, you better all be holding hands, and you better be listening to the teacher, because if not, you're going to get in trouble in a big way. So they did that really well. They were very professional, but at the same time, they created a market that only they can play in. So here we go. That's enough of that. I will say, though, that we probably do need more education in this area. The Keystone Center is just a for-hire group that will look at policies of all types. It doesn't have to be economic, it can be anything. But they did come out, I'm sure the biotech industry paid them, but they came out with this sustainability index where they looked at something like cotton, and they showed over a period of time that from 87 to 2007, there was a substantial decrease in the impact on the environment. Now that's their data, but they were supposed to be an independent group that does this. But I think we've done a poor job, because I remember as a cotton, we farm cotton in the Mississippi Delta, and I tell you, we sprayed DDT and toxaphene and everything, and I hate to get my liver analyzed. There's no telling what's in there. But we knew it wasn't working either. That was the other thing. It was costing us money. It wasn't working. And so there's been a substantial decrease. I mean, they rarely spray now with some of the BT cottons. And so it's going back up, but anyhow, I think if we're going to get into this area, we better do a better job of educating and coming out with these real numbers, because, again, an old lawyer trick, the lawyer trick is like, if you have the law on your side, you argue the law. You have the facts on your side, you argue the facts. If you don't have either one, you just pound on the table. And I think there's been a bunch of table pounding in this whole area on both sides, and we really do need more clear data. Hopefully it'll be data driven, but who knows. What about molecular markers? For us in forages, it's been pretty, so I asked the question, has anybody released any cultivars that depended pretty heavily on markers? They actually get into the process. And I looked mainly through the Journal of Plant Registration and Crop Science registrations. I didn't look them. That's as far as I looked, so this is biased in that area. And I found 0. And I was going back, and so I looked back at our own papers. So we developed, we published in TAG in 1993, 20 years ago, an RFLP map on diploid alfalfa. And we were so proud of that. And, and we said, well, we're right around the corner now. We still don't use them, not routinely, not yet. And part of the reason is everything kept changing on us. Jean-Luc, I mean, it's like I told the students, I said, it's like the movie, The Agony and the Ecstasy. You remember that old movie where the Pope is yelling at Michelangelo, when are you going to finish? When are you going to finish? So the breeders are when are we going to stop? Now we're at genotype by sequencing. Maybe we're there. If you can just sequence, you're there. You don't have any further to go, I don't think, for the technology. But anyhow, that did delay us because we kept moving, and then it was complicated genetics too. So I have to admit that I was Charlie Brummer in the early days, and now Maria. We're getting better at it, but we'll see. But definitely genotyping has gotten better. There are networks now, and there's been a lot more investment in both the industry level and at the government level, of course. And these are just 2 networks where you can get sequences, alfalfa sequence, and they've sequenced alfalfa now, and so you can get a lot of good information there. So really, what's happened, and why I'm more optimistic now, is that genotyping costs have really gone down, even for those of us in these type of crops. But phenotyping still an issue, still a cost, and GBA is still big, and so we still have to nail those things through that same problem that I introduced, Plant Breeding 101, day 1. But I think we'll get there. It's just that that's where we are. So, especially the latter part of my career, because I knew I was going to be retiring before long, and I kept saying, we got to do something. I got to use these things, and so I kept saying, it's just a tool. I'm just going to use it as a tool. I'm not trying to get really deep here. I just want to know, is there anything I can do cleverly to use it as a tool? And one of the things we hit on was, in these cross-pollinated perennials, it's a really classic recurrent selection is really what you do. You start with a population. It could be anything. Your favorite ones, or ones you've put together, or ones you stole, or whatever, and then you evaluate the genotypes either on an individual basis or on a family basis, and then from there you take the best ones out, either based on their individual performance, their family performance, or whatever you're trying to get at, and then you select the superior individuals. You see, it just kind of goes around. I think this thing's about to die, Mark. See, it kind of goes in a circle. A cycle, and you can develop the next cycle of the population and do it again. Or if it's really good, you might just spin them all off and develop a synthetic variety. That variety get into some multiple location testing, and if it's a good experimental, you can put it in the market. I did that for several varieties, by the way. I think, Don, we both did. So, but I did a lot of phenotypic research, and so I always wanted to structure and be systematic, and so what we did, we added a little bit here where we took all those genotypes and we ran the markers across them, and we were able then to set them all up, and then we put them into, because in this switchgrass, this is a switchgrass thing, we were able to structure them based on their marker diversity, and then we were going to do, in switchgrass actually is very interesting. There is a possibility that you can clonally replicate parents, clonally on a commercial scale, and then because it's highly self-incompatible, you put them out there, and most of the seedlings coming off there will be F1s, and you can sell those F1s. So we were trying to develop these pools which we were going to take these clones from, so we're going to use the old recurrent selection, but developing from pools and then using those. So we actually used them to put our pools together based on diversity, and now we're taking the tester from one pool becomes the tester for the other pool, and then you go back and you keep going, so it's the old recurrent selection scheme, reciprocal recurrent selection, I guess, So we just did it. They say, this makes sense to me as a breeder. It makes sense. It's a good way to use the markers. We had the markers. Why not just run them? It didn't take that much, and so we at least got off and got off. And there are other things we could do. If you've got a few markers for some dominant traits or something, that's good, because a lot of times you don't want to bring crap to the field either. So if you can pre-screen them all through the greenhouse, then what you're going to do in the field, which is a lot more costly, time-consuming, be better to do it there. So I'm going to end up with a flurry here, just mainly for the students, so you old heads probably know this. It's going to be just kind of a random thing of what I learned in 40 years a little bit. So first of all, emphasize fundamentals. It's amazing. I tell you a good example of this. Go to a Little League game, baseball game, watch the children, and watch before the game, they take infield, outfield, batting practice. Then go to the Yankee Stadium before the game and watch those pros. What do? Infield, outfield, batting practice. And they look just like those little leaguers because they're reinforcing their fundamentals all the time. So always think about what are the fundamentals that you need to live by. Some you can challenge, you know, there's no doubt you can challenge them. That's good, you know, want that thinking outside the box. But most of the time, we don't get grounded in the fundamentals. I was talking to the students about the fundamentals of the bioenergy industry, their industry, about where we missed out on the fundamentals. The main one we missed out on is that we developed all these good switchgrass varieties and didn't have a market for them. So fundamentals is maybe you should have a market before you do something. First thing is I'd say is there an easier way than biotechnology, introducing all these technologies? This on the left is a little hard to see probably. On the left is a crabgrass variety that we developed. Crabgrass, you say, yeah, this guy's out there. Crabgrass is very nutritious grass, and it's an annual, and it's used a lot in Texas and Oklahoma as an annual summer grazing. But one of the things that they don't like about it is it heads too quickly, so that means that the quality is going down. So we did one cycle of recurrent selection for just heading date. In the field, we could just visually see it. Boop. So now it's about 2 weeks later. We did another cycle, and we went 3 weeks later. Got a variety. You know, we didn't have to have markers. We didn't have to have transgenes. We just did it. So there might be a not easier way, again, getting back to fundamentals. What do you want to do? Is there an easier way? This is another one, Bermuda grass. Now up here in New York, y'all grow a lot of grass alfalfa combinations, but we don't there. But Bermuda grass is a very aggressive summer grass. It's planted on most of our hay fields and pastures. But we found we can actually grow alfalfa with it. So the question is, Bermuda people always wanted a higher quality Bermuda grass. It's like, well, it's a C4 grass that lays down a lot of lignin, and its digestibility goes to hell pretty quickly. And so it's hard. You're going to take a transgenic approach to try to lift its quality. So the RFQs you can get with Bermuda grass, which is relative feed quality, is a number. It's around 100 if you're lucky. You throw alfalfa into the mix, and all of a sudden you lift that RFQ and that mixture to 140. Well, you can breed all day long in Bermuda. You're never going to get it to 140. You know, so why not just put alfalfa in it and learn how to manage it? And they're doing that. That was taken. You think that's in Iowa, don't you? That's in Jennings, Florida, right on the Georgia-Florida line. Looks like Iowa, doesn't it, with the corn and alfalfa? What about, is there an easier way? You know, we were working, most tall fescue in this country is what's called continental types, which are European types. They're very summer active types. So Kentucky 31, if you've heard of that, it's classic. But there's another type that comes out of the Mediterranean type, called summer dormant. And what it does in the Mediterranean climate is it escapes the heat and drought. It just goes into a dormancy. So when we planted pastures, we had a program going, but we had a drought in Oklahoma in 2011 that was biblical. I mean, it was big time. 90 days above 100 degrees, 20 of those days above 110, no rain. Well, that summer active one, it went to glory. You know, there was no way we're going to bring that. I don't know where it went, but it wasn't there anymore. But look at the summer active, and the fall, it came back. So we had worked on the wrong germplasm all those years. I don't know how much breeding we'd have to do to bring that up, the drought tolerance to that, but it would be a lot. So for those, this is mainly for people in forages, but I think we emphasize as breeders the genetics and breeding principles, but you must understand basic forage and pasture management principles. And some, this is just throwing up, I actually took a course from Jerry Mott, who was a big guy in forage management, pasture management, but he had Mott's curve, which is, well, you'd have to study it, but it's just like gain per acre, gain per animal. The economics gets to be, what is more important to you, a gain on each animal or gain per acre? Well, usually it's gain per acre, but both of them, if you overgraze, you'll lose. But if you undergraze, you'll increase gain per acre, and gain per animal, but so anyhow, I won't get into that. But if you want to know something, we'll talk about it later. But just knowing that principle. But really what you're doing in there is what is the effect of the animal on the forage and what is the effect of the forage on the animal? That's really what you're measuring. That's the fundamentals. What are you measuring? You're measuring those two effects. If you're not measuring those two effects, you're not a forage breeder. And there's the things I've learned over the years is grazing tolerance is as important as yield. And naturalized ecotypes have great value. Duranta tall fescue and Duranta white clover and Jessup tall fescue were ecotype derivatives. They were my base germplasm. We collected ecotypes all over the South, and they became the base germplasm. The settlers had brought them in, planted them. God had done all the rest in natural selection, and we just went and creamed off the best ones and did a little breeding on them, and they became varieties. And always examine animal performance if you're going to work in this area. Cellulosic bioenergy, I can only say that for both that and carbon sequestration crops is cyclical. We got a contract in 87. We got another contract from the DOE in 96. We got another contract several contracts from DOE in 2006. But during those interval periods, we didn't get any money to do bioenergy crops. So the main reason is because commercialization opportunities for those crops became low. And we're making more progress here. I don't have time to get in there. It would be great, though, see that pump jack? It'd look like it's pumping right out of that hay bale, doesn't it? That'd be nice if we could just pump oil right out of a hay bale. To me, this is what I live by my whole career as a cultivar developer. If you're not helping farmers and ranchers and you're not producing a good cultivar is the best way to do that. It's still a rush when you go out there and you see acres of your stuff and the farmer tells you it looks pretty good. That's really what you can hope for. All breeding is local. We get into things, big issues like climate change and stuff like that, which is fine. But what does it mean to you as a breeder? And if I use Oklahoma as an example, again, we get back to what is your reference population of environments you're dealing with. You might already be dealing, in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, we're already dealing with that because you got this pronounced east-west moisture drop-off. When you get to Oklahoma, look if I'm just breeding for Oklahoma, I go from 52 inches of rain to 16 in the state of Oklahoma. Well, that's a big change. And not only that, again, I know climate change is mostly about temperature, but it's when it combines with low rainfall that you really have most of the problems in agriculture. And look, not only, so I'm getting into an area in Oklahoma that's in the middle of the pack. So it's not 52 inches, not 16 inches, it's 37 inches. And then look at all the bumping around there. And look what happens in 1 year, 12 months, it went from one of the lowest rainfalls to one of the highest. I got it circled in red, but that happened, it bounces all around. So your environments, so what you might be doing is all the time breeding for the extremes. And if climate change is real, then your extremes get bigger. So you got to keep that in mind. But I think most farmers and most researchers, if you ask them, do you believe in climate change? I think they would, based on this experience, they'd answer you like Mark Twain answered, somebody said, do you believe in infant baptism? He said, believe in it? Hell, I've seen it. So we just know that that's probably going on here. You got to find a champion for your cultivars if they ever get out in the marketplace. It might have to be you. I don't know how many times I've stood in front of farmers with my Alpha Grays hat on, my belt buckle. This is good stuff, boys. You need to use it, you know. But if Burton told me that too. He said, if the breeder won't stand behind it, who's going to stand behind it? You know. So you got to stand. You finally got to step up and stand behind it. But you also need to work with commercial partners. There's no doubt. As a public breeder, I've got to, and then. And these on-farm demos are real critical. Of course, I don't need to tell these people, you in the room here, but if you don't have good students, and these are 3 students I had all at the same time, they've all gone on to be great scientists. So I wasn't Emerson, and they weren't McClintock and Beetle. But anyhow, I think the team approach is the main message here that I want to leave you. And although the traits are great, don't forget the germplasm. We kind of keep tending to overlook that. It's important to have good base germplasm and to have a good stock of it. So, final messages. For your students especially, you got to work hard. I mean, it's always been about hard work. You saw that original Burton thing. If you work hard, work with your hands. But there's a good African proverb that came out of Thomas Friedman's book that I like. It says, when the gazelle wakes up, he knows he must run faster than the fastest lion. When the lion wakes up, he knows he must run faster than the slowest gazelle. So I don't know whether you're a lion or a gazelle, but when the sun comes up, you better be running. But that's all to say that you always need to work. You don't need to work. And as I've gotten older, I've really got to appreciate this. I want to do a little personal something. This is my family. So we got 3 generations here. And I love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. If you can laugh often and much, I like that introduction, and appreciate respect of intelligent people and the affection of children. And really at the end, is to leave the world a better place, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know even one's life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. So, just remember that. Don't forget your personal thing. And instead of having 1,000 names up here, which I had to put to all the acknowledgments, I'm gonna praise the organizations. Leland School District in Leland, Mississippi. If I've done anything, it's score 1 for the Mississippi Public Schools. And went to Mississippi State and the University of Florida and worked at the University of Georgia, and I think we always forget these are just like Cornell, they're land grant colleges. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the land grant system. And of course the Noble Foundation, which was a private nonprofit foundation founded by a guy who believed in doing agricultural research. So I want to acknowledge them. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being here.